Well, the Shadow Assistant Treasurer, Matthias Cormann, is also with us tonight. Matthias Cormann, welcome to the programme. Is there anything in this budget, any savings measures or spending measures the Coalition's going to knock back?
Well, I just want to make the point up front that Penny Wong had it right when she was quoted in the media earlier in the week, that this would be a typical Labour budget. It is a typical Labour budget with more waste, more taxes, more deficits, more debt and more spin. And you ask questions of the Minister about $22 billion worth of savings. And of course, the first thing to point out here is that more than $6 billion out of those $22 billion in so-called savings are in fact tax increases or other revenue measures. But that's just not serious. The biggest so-called savings measure in this budget is the $1.7 billion flat tax. These are not savings.
So what will you block?
Well, I mean, essentially, we will look at the detail of the budget.
But you've got the detail.
Well,
it was released tonight.
We're working through some of the detailed measures and make decisions over the next couple of days as to what our final decisions are going to be. Tony Abbott will be presenting the budget reply on behalf of the opposition on Thursday. That will be Tony Abbott and the Coalition's plan, positive plan for Australia, with as a centrepiece restoring good government for Australia.
But you wouldn't rule out blocking some of these measures?
Well, I mean, clearly some measures, if measures are bad public policy, we will not be supporting them. I mean, we can't block anything in the Parliament on our own. We can only ever make the argument to others in the Parliament, and if others in the Parliament support the merits of our argument, then of course the Parliament will defeat these measures.
The Coalition has said, Joe Hockey said earlier tonight, there's nothing in this budget for families, but in fact there is, and the Minister just made the point then, there's the extension of the Family Tax Benefit Part A for families with teenagers, there's a bringing forward of the low-income tax offset.
Well, there's a $2 billion assault on families across Australia, in fact, because of the freezing of indexation of various family tax benefit arrangements, the freezing of various thresholds. Look, and if you put that against a blowout in spending of about $1.7 billion, because the government has decided to dismantle our border protection, our strong border protection arrangements back in August 2008, the government is now spending $1.7 billion more over the forward estimates on dealing with illegal boat arrivals, because they've mismanaged our border protection arrangements.
You're saying the blowout before the budget, you were saying it was 800 million, now saying it's 1.7 billion.
Well, we've looked at the budget figures today and it's 1.7 billion over the forward estimates. And the point to be made here is that the last year of the Howard government, we spent $100 million on managing illegal boat arrivals. This government is now spending more than $1 billion, so it's increased tenfold. So when you see these sorts of waste and mismanagement, these sorts of examples of waste and mismanagement, and you put that against a $2 billion assault on families across Australia who are already dealing with cost of living pressures, then really it just shows what an inappropriate budget this is.
So what would the Coalition have done for families? What would you have done differently?
Well, I mean, as I say, Tony Abbott will present a very positive plan for Australia on Thursday, and that will detail that will put in great detail forward our plans for Australia into the future. But the point tonight really is to talk about the fact, and Wayne Swan is ashamed about this. He hasn't been prepared to talk about the level of debt that is actually now in this budget.
Well, let's look at the level of debt, and indeed let's look at this, the promise that we're on track for a surplus in 2012-13. You've seen the numbers, you've read the budget papers. Could the Coalition get to a surplus before then?
Yeah, well, what we've seen in this budget is this year there's a deterioration in the budget bottom line of about $8 billion. The deficit will go to $50 billion. Next year there will be a deterioration of about $10.3 billion. The deficit will go up to $22.6 billion. And we're expected to believe that the following year, 2012-13, that somehow not only will there be no deterioration, but there will be, in fact, a slight improvement. That's just completely unbelievable.
Could the Coalition have done better?
Well, I mean, Wayne Swan and this government have been blessed with the best terms of trade in 140 years, and Wayne Swan conceded that in his budget speech today. This budget should be in a much stronger position. This budget should be in surplus, but it's because of 3 or 4 years of waste and mismanagement and incompetence from a directionless Labor government, which is unable to make the tough decisions. This Labor government has talked a lot about tough decisions and a tough budget over the last 2 or 3 weeks, but now that we've actually seen the budget papers, I mean, it is bleeding with red ink, and there's not many tough decisions in it.
The Coalition's made a big point that without the details of the carbon tax, that this is a budget with a hole in the heart, but we've just heard from the Minister that it's going to be broadly revenue neutral. That's hardly a hole in the heart.
Well, I was interested to hear her say broadly revenue neutral. I mean, that's quite interesting. What we know for a fact is that the revenue figures for 2012-13 are wrong because they don't include the carbon tax. The expenditure figures for 2012-13 are wrong. The inflation figures for 2012-13 are wrong, as are the job figures for 2012-13. They're also wrong. The mining
to be fair, Treasury forecasts were wrong under your government as well.
Well, the carbon tax is not even included. I mean, the mining tax is supposed to start on 1 July 2012, as is the carbon tax, because the government was so keen to put the cash into the budget, bottom line from the mining tax. They put it into the budget because they want to hide the detail of the carbon tax and the implications on the cost of living pressures for families across Australia. They are not putting it into the budget. It's completely inappropriate.
Well, we'll have to get more detail from the Coalition about what you would do on Thursday night.
Well, we would not have a carbon tax.
Thank you very much for joining us. The Treasurer, Wayne